Assalamualaikum and a very good day. I'm Saif.
I'm Abrar.
I'm Aizuddin.
I'm Yushini.
I'm Dania. I'm Ali.
I'm Khalida.
I'm Anis Azida.
And today we are going to present Chapter 7, Language and Culture and Identity
And
and
social
factors. Hope you enjoy. Hi, I'm Saif. From the previous presentation, we have learned about what is culture, parameters, stereotype, linguistic determinism, also linguistic relativity. But today, we are going to learn about communities of practice. Throughout this presentation, we are going to focus on 4 things, which are the definition, the components of community of practice, or known as COP, and also the characteristic and the conclusion. Let's start with the definition. So, what is communities of practice? Basically, communities of practice is a group of people who share a concern or passion for something they do and learn how to do it better as they interact regularly. As similar to the definition of culture, the COP is basically what we share as a concern or our passion to something and learn to do it in a better way. Next, I would love to explain about the components of COP. There are 3 components of COP. The first one is the domain, community, and the practice. Let's go to the domain. Basically, domain is the identity that defined by a shared domain of interest. It is not just a network of a people or club of friends, but it is a membership that implies a commitment to the domain. For example, in our context, we as a language student, students, okay, for example, I said he is the radiologist, Star Trek fans, middle school history teachers, Seahawks and football fans. In our context, maybe we as the linguists or the teachers that teach English. Next is the community. Community is the members of a specific domain that interact and engage in shared activities that help each other and share information with each other. Therefore, there needs to be people who interact and learn together in order for a COP to be formed. Back to our definition of COP, the main things in COP is the engagement or the interaction between peoples. So, the second components of COP focus on the community. Therefore, with the engagement between the community, they can interchange the function or their roles. For example, impressionist painters who sometimes met in cafes to discuss their painting style. In our context, I can say that maybe a group of teachers met in a cafe and discussed about how to teach English better. Okay. Next, the last components of COP is practice. Practice is meant for the practitioners. Practitioners will develop a shared repertoire of the resources which can include stories, helpful tools, experiences, ways of handling typical problems, and etc. Meaning here is practice is the way how we practice how we do the practice. Maybe there are many ways that we can do in order to make the engagement better. Okay, moving on to the next slide, which will be explained by my friends, is a characteristic of COP.
Okay, so I will be explaining the next part of the presentation. I'm Anis Azida. Okay, so there are 3 characteristics of COP, which is the mutual engagement, joint enterprise, and shared repertoire. Okay, for the first characteristic, which is the mutual engagement, the key point of mutual engagement, you can simply remember the word participation, because mutual engagement is the participation of the member in the community that create or build the collaborative relationships. This is what it means by mutual engagement. So, for example, simulation and peer teaching. In second language learning, we can say that in classroom setting, the teacher and the students are the social entity in the mutual engagement, because the teacher wants to teach English and the students wants to learn English. So that's why they are in the same community. Okay, for the second characteristic, which is joint enterprise, the key point of joint enterprise is you can remember the word interaction. It is between interaction. For example, if we use the context classroom setting, the interaction between the teachers and the student, and they will need to negotiate and understanding. Means both of them at the very first characteristic, they need to collaborate, and here they need to negotiate. For example, the teacher wants to teach a lesson about the parts of the body on that day, for example, and then the students need to give feedback or respond towards the teacher, so that the teacher knows, the students are understanding what she or he is trying to teach them in the class. And then they need to have the same goal, and both of them are up to something. The teacher wants to teach the lesson, and the students wants to gain something from the lesson, and the goal is the same. For example, it's now parts of the body, they want to master or learn about the parts of the body. Okay, and then the third characteristic is the shared repertoire. Shared repertoire, after we have participate, interact, and the last one we need to is the practice. It is a form that the community, which is the teacher and the students. If we look at the classroom setting, they produce this kind of like we call it, the examples are resources. For example, let's say the teacher is teaching parts of the body, so there must be some vocabularies that the teacher shared with the students, such as ears, nose, legs, hair, and then the students in the classroom will get the same vocabulary based on the lesson that the teacher has taught. So that's why we call it as the shared repertoire. So we can see that the vocabulary shared between them, so that the community itself understand what the vocabulary is because of the lesson. Next, okay, so this is an example of how we can apply community of practice in the second language learning. For example, we have situated learning. Situated learning is when the students are more inclined to learn by actively participating in the learning experience. Means that the teacher does not spoon feed the student. Means that the student itself need to participate and need to be active in the learning session, in the learning process. And it is a matter of creating meaning from the real activities of daily living, because we know that students understand and remember things better when they understand and they understand and they create the meanings of the activities. So the example of situated learning, we can say that it's okay. The students can get it from field trips, exchange programs, because the students be in the learning process itself.
So, all in all, what we are going to explain in communities of practice is basically focuses on three things. First one is the definition, the components, and also the characteristic. By having all these three together, we can produce a better understanding of communities of practice.
Assalamualaikum. So I'm Dania. I'm going to talk about identity and language learning. So I'm going to explain to you guys for the first 4 points. Next. Okay, so for the first point is the revolutionary change in defining and understanding sociocultural dimension of SLA centers on the concept of identity. So we're going to focus on the identity itself. So for example, in Malaysia, it's difficult to see the sociocultural dimension, because here in Malaysia we don't have that identity. It's not that we don't have the identity, but it's very difficult to see the identity itself. For example, in 1SK, sekolah kebangsaan, we have those three races: Malay, Chinese, and Indian. So if we have a group of these three races, the language that we going to use is Malay language, because if Chinese use their language and Indian use their language, probably the Malay and the other races will not understand them. So it's like the majority dominate the minority. So we know that in SK the majority is the Malay races, and so we know that Malay will dominate other races. So that's why we focus on the identity. We're going to use Malay language instead of other language to converse with each other. So another example is that if we happen to study abroad, we go to that place. So we are the minority in that culture. So we tend to assimilate their culture. Okay. So we really focus on identity. For example, it's like Dr. Amalina. We can see that how she is assimilated with the culture, with the identity at her place. Okay, we know that she's been working there for years, and she tends to assimilate the identity. So it's like if you go anywhere, you're not going to forget your culture. So if you stay there for years, you're going to retain your culture. Okay. So I'm going to play the video of Tima.
Welcome to my show. I tak suka skrip sebab I nak kecek sendiri. I tak ada skrip. I nak kecek sendiri. Tu opinion I nak buat gitu kok. Semua orang ni I nak talk sendiri. I tak ada skrip.
You can check Kelantan ke di school you?
Dok, tu English school.
Dengan friend you can check Kelantan?
Ya English. Dua-dua English. Sebab Kelantan I duduk somewhere. I tekak ni hok Kelantan, ni hok English.
Oh,
Dan
okay.
ni dua-dua. Ni Kelantan, ni English, ni Thai. Ni group ni hok lagu. Jangan skip. News brain kita tergapo kita nak talk
In the
ni.
video, we can explain the second point, which is the relationship between power, identity, and language learning by examining how identities are constructed and negotiated by learners. So for the second point, we are focusing on the constructed and negotiated by learners. Constructed and negotiated by learners means that you nego with yourself what language you want to use to interact with people. So it's like if you, based on the video, we can see that Tima can speak Malay because she's from Kelantan. So she's a Kelantanese. So she still retain the culture. Okay, the Kelantanese culture. So even though she stayed there for about few years, but she still retained the culture itself. So we negotiated with ourselves what language that we want to use. So that's why we focus on the constructed and negotiated by the learners. It's all about the language learning. It's all about the identity itself. Okay, so the next point is emotion is linked to the manner in which learners construct their social realities. And next is identity theory represent how a person feels related to the language. Okay, for my last point is like, for example, the South Korea. In South Korea, they are really proud with their language, and we know they use their language even with the foreigners. So they do learn English, but they don't learn English in depth like in Malaysia. So, for example, Ali stayed there. Okay, Ali stayed in Korea. So he wants to be like Korean people. He wants to talk in Korea like native speakers. So it's like he absorbed everything, absorbed culture, the identity to be included in the society. So that's why that's why the identity theory represents how a person feels related to the language. They want to be in that culture. So that's why they try to be like native speakers. So they are like near to native, not a native speaker, but they are near to native. Okay, so that explains my fourth point, identity theory represents how a person feels related to language. So that's all for my part.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. I am Anis Adlin and I will be continuing the explanation for language and identity learning. First point is language is the primary tool through which we construct our identity. An example to support this statement is imagine us as a Malay. We live in a Malay community, but somehow we cannot speak Malay. Of course, we would feel excluded, we would feel like an outsider. And it also works vice versa. If, as a Malay, we know the language, we live in the Malay community, by knowing the language, we could communicate with the community there, and of course, we would feel welcomed. And in the end, we could identify with the culture and the language itself, which is Malay. The second point is for children as well as adults, they will use one function from Vygotsky, which is self-regulation. Self-regulation is like basically like reflection, where one is aware of the mistakes they made through interaction and social activities. For example, a child is being told by the mother to keep quiet after he interrupted the conversation between his mother and her friend. And from that, the child would know that interrupting an adult's conversation is considered as impolite. So at the end, he would know how to self-regulate and would not do it again in the future. Third point is identity theory recognizes the investment of learners in pursuing a community of the imagination, a desired community that offers possibilities for an enhanced range of identity options in the future. It's a long point, but to simplify, I'll give you another example of Fatima. Fatima migrates to the US for work, and then she marries a local man there. So basically, it's a mixed marriage, but she still wants to retain her language, identity, and culture, which is Malay. What she does is she still speaks Malay to her friends and to her parents whenever they visit or whenever they call her, and she also uses Malay to express her feelings or when she's frustrated, because she finds that venting in Malay is more satisfying than doing so in English. And she also tries to use English in her household with her husband by teaching him simple Malay words. So in the end, they would communicate in Malay, even though it's little, but there's Malay communication going on in the household as well. And she also still celebrates Raya, hosts open house, and others that symbolizes that she's a Malay. And when she has children, she wants her children to do the same, as well as her grandchildren, so that they will not forget their roots. So in the end, in the future, her family, her extended family, would have a range of identity options, which is Malay, and not just knowing the original culture there, which is American culture. And my last point is every learner identifies with the target culture in the same way. This statement could be argued because no person is the same. Some could still retain their language, their identity, their culture, even though they have lived abroad for years, while others are probably more comfortable with assimilating with the new culture. However, we cannot deny that a person is of her original descent just because she is now comfortable with identifying with the new culture. For example, Dr. Amalina. We cannot say that she's no longer a Malay or a Malaysian just because she has lived abroad for years and she has assimilated the culture, the language there. We cannot deny that she's a Malay. She's still a Malay. She's just more comfortable with assimilating with the culture in the UK now. So that's it for language and identity learning. Identity and language learning. Identity and language learning. Okay, thank you.
Hey, hello, good morning. I'm Yushni. So I'm going to talk about the historical landmarks in cross-cultural research. So next. Okay, according to the essentialist terms, culture could be defined and understood in terms of various difficulties encountered by learners in crossing cultural borders and in what some call second cultural learning. So, when one, for example, when one is placed in a situation, for example, foreign class, so one will encounter a situation where they will feel awkward to speak to their classmates and to adapt their culture. Many things such as the place or maybe the clothings. In this situation, they will tend to face a different cross-cultural borders, and thus this will lead them to face difficulties. Okay, next. Okay, so acculturation. Acculturation is the process of adjusting and adapting to a new culture, usually when one is living in the new culture and often with the resultant creation of a new cultural identity. This process occurs when an individual migrates or travels to a new foreign country, and when that individual has already been practicing his or her own culture and is tend to face another new culture. So when they start to adjust and adapt to a new culture, that is when the process of acculturation occurred. So the creation of a new identity is at the heart of cultural learning, called as acculturation. So examples of countries where they have their own culture is as they practice their own culture is as such as Thailand, Kenya, China, and Germany. Okay, Thai people greet each other with a way of holding your hands together at the chest like a prayer and give a light bow like this. While people in Kenya thinks that pointing with index finger is really insulting, they practice using their whole hand. Next, China. People in China use both their hands when passing food or gift to another person. While in Germany, they bang their fists on the table to show their appreciation at the end of meeting. Next. Okay, culture shock. Understanding a new culture, for example, foreign language classroom, and can clash with a person's worldview, self-identity, and systems of thinking, acting, feeling, and communication. Okay, culture shock occurs when a person is same, they travels or migrate to a country, and they tend to feel that everybody else is different from them. They will be feeling isolated maybe. So, a language two learner may experience culture shock, a phenomenon ranging from mild irritability to deep psychological crisis. Initially, a person tend to think that this is a normal thing to go through when they travel to a new foreign country. But then, this culture shock can cause a person to a deep psychological crisis. Next. Okay, so these are some of the effects that culture shock can affect an individual. For example, the feeling of estrangement, anger, hostility, indecision, frustration, unhappiness, sadness, loneliness, homesickness, and physical illness. Okay, what is meant by hostility is that a behavior of unfriendliness, which means you rather prefer to keep quiet or silent rather than to communicate with your friends. Okay, next. Okay, culture shock as the second of 4 successive stages at culture acquisition. Culture shock does not always end in a very negative way. It could also ends in a positive way where a person could gain the culture acquisition. Okay, first stage is that an initial period of excitement and euphoria. For example, me, I traveled to country and I feel excited about the new culture, new friends I get there. So that will be the first stage. Second, culture stress or culture shock, erosion of self-esteem and security. Okay, day by day, I will start to face a phase where culture shock, I tend to face the culture shock like I explained earlier. Okay, the third stages, gradual recovery, adjustment to new ways of thinking, feeling and acting. So I tend to adjust and adapt to the culture there. So I can adjust myself. So that particular individual will not feel that culture shock anymore. The last stages is a final stage of adaptation, integration and acceptance of a new identity. So in this stage, that particular individual could freely give opinions, they can talk to each other, and there's no more feelings like loneliness or homesickness or something like that. Okay, next. Okay, example of example of a person who achieved these 4 stages could be proven by Madan. He's originated from UK and he came to Malaysia, Terengganu for a kind of vacation, and he settled down in Terengganu. So he is an example of a person who successfully achieved the culture acquisition. Okay, he's been living in Malaysia since 2009 and he is well known for his eloquence speaking in Terengganu dialect. Next. Okay, Lambert's 1967's concept of anomie. Okay, feelings of social uncertainty, homelessness or dissatisfaction. This is where maybe a person in culture shock tend to experience such feelings. They uncertain to give their opinions or to mix around their homelessness feelings and dissatisfaction of anything. It could be anything. While communicating or listening or speaking or giving opinions, it could be anything. And next, linguistically, a person begins to master the foreign language and new culture simultaneously. English-speaking Canadians begin to think in French and even dream in French. This could be seen like how much learning a foreign language could affect a person itself. Like they might also dream about the language, the new language they are learning in their daily life. So that's all from me. Thank you.
Assalamualaikum, I'm Farida. So I'll be talking about social distance. Social distance means cognitive and affective proximity of two cultures that come into contact within an individual. So for example, the people from the United States are culturally similar to the Canadians, while US native and Chinese are by comparison relatively dissimilar because their social distance is lower. And another example is Korean, Japanese and Chinese are relatively similar because, not relatively similar, it's similar because they can't even speak English, and with that their social distance is lower. Based on John Schumann, 1976, he described social distance as consisting of the several possible parameters. So these 3 are the factors of social distance. So the first one is dominance, which is power relationship across two culture. So when this one country is dominant, this means that their social distance is greater compared to the non-dominant country. For example, US and China. So the second one is integration. The extent to which integration into a second culture is possible. We can see this, for example, Travel Noah. We can see how he integrates the South African culture into the British culture. So The last one is the congruency of two cultures in question. Congruency means the harmonization between the two cultures. Okay, next.
Yes.
Okay. So, for example, if two cultures are not congruent, which means if two cultures are not harmony, the negative attitude towards each other could against acculturation. If they cannot blend well, it will lead to negative attitudes. And then if the learning situation would be one in which the L2 group is non-dominant in relation to the target language group, assimilation or at least accommodation is desirable. This is related to the integration, which we can integrate. So when we integrate, we will. Okay. So this has something to do with integration. Sorry. And then when they can integrate the L1 into L2, it will lead to positive attitudes towards each other. And then based on Schumann's hypothesis, the bigger the social distance between two cultures, the bigger the difficulty the learner will have in learning the L2. And then, the smaller the social distance, the better will be the social language learning situation. So, this hypothesis was difficult if a rather subjectively defined phenomenon that defies definition, even though one can intuitively grasp the sense of what is meant. Which this meant, for example, like Ali comes from Zimbabwe, while Abu comes from China. But then Ali can understand Abu because Ali can grasp the sense. Okay, next. Okay, from Bill Acton, 1976, he came out with this. Instead of trying to measure actual social distance, he devised a measure of perceived social distance. He came out with this perceived social distance. So he devised the professed difference in attitude questionnaire, which is PDAQ, which asks learners to quantify what they perceive to be the differences in attitude between two cultures. So basically, this is the quantifier, and it leads to this finding, which is Acton found that in the case of some learners, there was an optimal perceived social distance ratio, neither too close nor too far from the target culture, that typified the successful language learner. So Acton's theory of optimal perceived social distance actually supported from the Lambert's 1976, which the mastery of foreign language takes place hand in hand with the feelings of enemy and homelessness, where learners have moved away from their native culture but are still not completely adjusted to the target culture, which means when they migrate to another country or they have to adapt, they still cannot adapt with another culture because of some reasons. Next. Okay, after that, Brown 1980 proposed an optimal distance model of SLA, second language acronym. So, an adult who fails to master a second language in a second culture may have failed to synchronize linguistic and cultural development. Okay, when they fail to synchronize the linguistic and cultural development, they will experience a delay while into a stage of adaptation or integration in achieving communicative success in the L2 may result in lower motivation to succeed and possibly fossilization of language, which means when they cannot synchronize, they will experience the delay and then they will feel demotivated because they cannot adapt well with the new culture. So what was suggested could be seen as a culturally based critical period that is independent of the age of the learner. Next. Okay, this is another point. I'll be talking about attitudes. So attitude is the postulation of theories of social distance to account for acculturation presuppose the significance of attitude towards other culture. So So positive attitude towards self, the native language and the target language group enhance proficiency. When they can grasp the language, it will lead to the positive attitude. However, there were mixed results on the relative advantages and disadvantages of integrative and instrumental orientation. For example, better proficiency was attained by students who did not want to stay in the United States permanently. For example, Ali moved to the United States because he wants to study there, but then he don't really know how to speak English well. But since he is staying there, he needs to force himself to integrate with the culture. I mean, he needs to force himself to speak English and adapt with the culture well. So this will lead him to have a positive attitude towards himself and also the other group because he can adapt the culture and also the language. So negative attitude happens when they are not exposed to the social interaction. They do not have initiative to interact with other people, so they just emerge from one's indirect exposure to a culture group through television, movies, news media, books and other sources that may be less reliable. So these kind of sources will lead to negative attitudes. That's all, thank you.
Okay, Assalamualaikum. My name is Abro. So, I will tell you guys about ideology, policy, and politics. So, stereotype can be misleading of overgeneralization of sociocultural characteristics. In ideology, negative stereotypes have to maintain existing unequal social relations that favor powerful dominant groups. So we will talk about this after this. So identity construction always implies inclusionary and exclusionary process. For example, oneself and others. And we are inevitably faced with issue of power. So we always wonder who decide official national language, who decide on national standards of language, and who are the gatekeepers that determine the language policy. Okay, so the relationship between language and culture cannot underestimate the ideological consequences of language and language policy. Every country has some form of explicit, which is official, or implicit, unofficial policy that affect the status of its native language. So, many countries include one or more foreign language in this policy. So, even though the country have a policy for the native language, they also have some policy for the native language. The next one. The language not yet. So, the language become politicized because special interest groups yearn for power and economic gain, which will affect second language learners' identity. Okay, next. Okay, English as international lingua franca. So we know in lingua franca is the language that is used on that place by all of its users. Okay, English as lingua franca has become the subject of international debate. So they have been debating about the function of English language as a lingua franca, because we know we have a lot of language, but the language that we use when we communicate with the person from another country is English. So research showed that English teaching worldwide threatens to form an elitist cultural hegemony, widening the gap between havers and have-nots. So rapid growth of EIL. So what is EIL? EIL is English International Language, stimulate discussion about the status of English. It is varieties of what come to be called word Englishes. So word Englishes, we know some of it is, for example, we have here is India. So in Malaysia we have Chinese language, Chinese English and Malay English. That's for example. So the process of nativization or indigenization of English has spread from inner circle countries to an outer circle country. So what is inner circle country? So basically, inner circle country is a country that use English as its domain. For example, US, UK, Canada, and Australia. So outer circle countries basically is the countries that have been colonized by those big countries, and the English had been used by them. Next. So English is learned by children at school age and is the medium for primary, secondary, and tertiary education. When it comes to multilingual society, the difference between native and non-native speakers become irrelevant. English as lingua franca has blurred the function of ELA, ESL, and EFL. So ELA stands for English Native Language, and ESL stands for English Second Language, and EFL for English Foreign Language. So, native English speaking teachers was considered superior for many decades. So, there's a problem between a native English speaking teachers and non-native English teaching speakers. So, who did it better in teaching English? So, before we know anything about this, we will come across that native English speaking teachers might do better because they are the native of that language. However, a result was found by measures showed that non-native English speaking teachers or non-NESTS offer as many, if not more, inherent advantages. Okay, so I do a few research about this, and they talk about the difference. Why the non-native English speaker teachers is considered have more advantage than native English speaking teachers. This is because the speaker itself is, for example, I'm a Malay teacher that teach English, and they teach the English to the Malay student. So the teacher will know more about the culture of that student. So it will be easier for the teacher to engage with the student compared to the teacher from America that doesn't know about the culture of studying in Malaysia. Okay, next. Okay, teacher have been through the process of learning English possess distinct advantage over a native speaker. So this is like I just said before, the advantage that the teacher that is from that culture that teach the English to the student of that culture. Okay, blurring the lines of distinction between native and non-native speakers, between inner and outer circle, and the widening of the purpose of learning L2 leads to culture learning, to construction of identities in study, communities of practice. Next. Okay, second and foreign language acquisition. Spread of EIL blur the difference between ESL and EFL. So we know, before this we know that ESL and EFL are different. So what is the difference between ESL and EFL? So basically ESL is the learning of English in a country that uses the English as a dominant language. For example, United Kingdom, America, Canada, and Australia. And EFL is the learning of English in a country that did not use English as its dominant language. For example, Malaysia, and any other country that didn't use English as its dominant language. So in a region like Scandinavia, English has no official status, okay, but occupies such a high profile that virtually every educated person can communicate competently in English. So in Scandinavia, there's no official status about the English, but the higher the educated person and high level person use English very well in that country. So learning EFL or any second language in and first language culture with few opportunities to use it within the environment of the culture. For example, Japanese learning English in Japan may at first also appear to be easy to define. Okay, next. Okay, so this is the difference between second and foreign language acquisition. Okay, so as I said before, the difference between ESL and EFL is the usage of the language itself. So, spoken natively in a country, Arabic learns English in UK and US can be easily identified because in UK and US, English is used widely, and if someone is learning English, it can be identified very well that the person does not have proper knowledge about the language. So the next one is a set and widely used language for education, government, or business within the country. Learning English in the Philippines or India. So in the Philippines or India, the English is not widely used among the person for daily conversation, but it is used for mostly for education, government, or business within the country. So it cannot be easily identified because most of them are using their own native language. And I want to add something about this. So what is the difference between EFL and ESL? The main two differences that I got is that they got to learn more. Let's say in ESL, the person get to learn more about the language from the environment because everyone in that environment use that language. Okay. The next one is get to practice it. So, for example, in EFL, they learn the language in the class, so they cannot practice it with the people except in the class. So the learning itself will become not effective. So I have an example of about this. So my friend speak Turkish, but when I talk to him, my first impression is his language, his English will be very bad, and there's a lot of filler. But when I talk to him, he speaks like a real American. So I asked him, what did he do? So he told me he just watched YouTube and learned from it. So it can be seen that the practice is very important when it comes to second language. Okay, next. Okay, two global development reduce the clarity of identifying simple EFL context. So the first one is the establishment of immigrant communities within a various country provide ready access to users of so-called foreign language. So in all countries, we have a lot of immigrants. So when we have immigrant communities, so the person can practice the language with the immigrant communities. And the next one is for English, penetration of English provide further ready access to English even in isolated setting. And about this one, let's say you live in an island that doesn't have many people speak English, but since we have internet, we can access to learn English from YouTube and many other websites. So the terminology of ESL and EFL create a worldwide that people that have a good competence in the use and teaching of the language and expertise in telling others how it should be taught and can be considered native speaker. So when we talk about native speaker, the things that will come to our mind is that the person have a good competence in the use and teaching of the language and expertise in telling others how it should be taught and can be should be taught. Native speaker model do not necessarily exemplify the idealized competence that were once claimed for them.
My name is Ahmad Ahmed bin Abdul, matrix number 047965. As for my part, I will explain about linguistic imperialism and language rights. First thing first, I will explain about language or linguistic imperialism. Linguistic can be defined as a systematic means of communication ideas or feeling by the use of conventionalized by the use of signs, sounds, gestures, or marks having understood meanings. While imperialism can be defined as a policy or ideology of extending a country's rule over foreign nations, often by military force or by gaining political and economic control of other areas. Hence, the combined words between both are linguistic imperialism that can be defined as the imposition or force of one language on speakers of another language. Furthermore, EIL, which is known as English as an international language has been one of the most controversial issues to be appeared on its global spread. There are lots of controversial issues that are related to linguistic imperialism of the global spread of EIL, commonly the propagation of English language as a medium of education, commerce, and government. Yet, a central issue in the linguistic imperialism debate was the devaluing, if not genocide, of native languages through the colonial spread of English language. Moreover, there was little or no recognition of the imperialistic effect of the spread of English and also French in colonial context, according to Philipson in 1992. Moving on to the next topic, I will discuss a brief about a book written by Robert Philipson entitled Linguistic Imperialism, which plays an important role in the subject of English as the language imperialism. Well, this book explores the contemporary phenomenon of English as an international language and sets out to analyze how and why the language has become so dominant. This book explores the contemporary phenomenon of English as an international language and sets out to analyze how and why the language has become so dominant. Philipson viewed linguistic imperialism as a subtype of linguisticism. According to Nordquist in 2019, linguisticism can be defined as the discrimination based on language or dialect. As for language rights, the Universal Declaration of Linguistic Rights within the United Nations endorsed the right of all people to develop in their own languages. They also offer children access to education in their own languages. Additionally, some sign of hope for the preservation of indigenous language was seen in the Council of Europe's in 1988 European Charter for Regional and Minority Languages, which assume a multilingual context and support for minority language. As for conclusion on linguistic imperialism and language rights, I would like to take a quote from H. Douglas Brown, which is the author of the book, The Principle of Language Learning and Teaching. He quoted, "We can break down barriers of communication with English, but we are reminded that two-edged sword of EIL carries with the danger of the imperialistic erosion of a global ecology of languages and cultures." This quote clearly supported the importance of language rights. Next is language policy. Language policy can be defined as the stated position of a government on the official or legal status of a language or languages in a country, often including the role of a language in educational, commercial, and political institutions. This means the language policy is the decision by a political entity. For example, the language for the education of children is a matter of policy, such as the Ministry of Education in Malaysia offers education in a designated language such as English for mathematics subject. Besides, clash of value system is brought to bear on the ultimate decision, which is linguistic diversity, cultural pluralism, ethnicity, race, power, status, politics, and economics. Thomas in 1996 had highlighted that such legislation rarely results in a unified society speaking solely the mandated languages. This is due to the usage of mother tongue language, which is L1, are still used despite the legislation of language policy in a particular country. In relation to the language policy, the issue of English only in the United States can be given as an example. US never declared English as an official language. Hence, English only ballots is a system of voting secretly and in writing on particular issues across many states in US. The ballots argued on two things, which are official English policy was needed to unify the country and decades-long debates over bilingual education. The issue English only are already disfranchised, which means deprive someone of the right to vote. The minority cultures and these things should be avoided. Center for Applied Linguistics in the United States already suggested the solution, which quoted, "In the last decade, we have seen a growth in community schools teaching heritage languages and informal dual language programs Hopefully, this trend will continue and opportunities for developing multilingual competence from an early age will be expanded. This statement clearly supported the right of language policy to be judged accordingly. I think that's all from now. Thank you.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi ta'ala wabarakatuh. I'm Aizul Harif and today I will be presenting about teaching intercultural and competence. It is a very simple and easy topic for me. Alright, so next Dania. This is actually the comparison and the combinations of the research that has been done. Okay, so I'll begin with the definition of intercultural competence. So before this, all of my group members already give the definitions of cultural and so on. So now is the intercultural competence. What is intercultural competence? Intercultural competence has to do with far less negotiable discourse world, which is the communication in speaking or writing context, the circulation of values and identities across cultures, the inversion and even inventions of meaning. That all of this is often hidden behind a common illusion of effective communication. When one people or a person is speaking, so we don't see what his culture is actually. If he or she speak fluently and speak in a good way. Alright, so this is also according to a research that self that is engaged in intercultural communication is a symbolic self that is constituted by symbolic systems such as language. So I'm very happy to re-quote what Ushini's example is regarding Mak Dan, which he is staying in Terengganu and he interested to learn Terengganu language or dialect. That means he is constituted by the symbolic system such as language, the Terengganu dialect itself. When he stayed in Terengganu, he learned the cultures in Terengganu. Alright, so next we have come to the definition of culture learning. What is culture learning? Culture learning is a process of creating shared meaning between cultural representatives, constructing a social identity within the learners of COP, communities of practice. Okay, so the language learners should undergo culture learning as a process that is as a way of perceiving, interpreting, feeling, being in the world and relating to where one is and one meets. So here I also can use the Mak Dance. He stays in Terengganu, he perceives, he interprets and feeling that the cultures, how Terengganuians live and what they do, what are their daily activities, and they come to love. Right? So, alright, so next is the SLA X, Sociocultural Identity. SLA, according to research, SLA, second language acquisition, is intertwined with sociocultural identity. The language, thought and culture are a package that second language learner must grapple to acquire sociocultural identity successfully. So language, thought and culture must come as a package. So if a learner wants to learn the sociocultural, these three elements is a must for them to learn. And a teacher also should focus on intercultural competence instead of only focusing on communicative competence. Okay, here's a big glance of fact. According to the research by one of the researchers, if you can see in the textbook, linguistic relativity is not determinism, is alive and well in 21st century and thriving in the languages and communities of the world. So, to come to some extent, second language is also second culture learning as the communicative use of and second language is interwoven with developing intercultural competence. Okay, there is a factor of fragility of the student. When a student learns second language, the learners can feel alienation in the process of learning a second language. The alienation from the people in their home culture, from the target culture, and also from themselves. For example, once again I use Mak Dan. If he is Terengganu, he might feel the alienation in the beginning In other words, he's being judged from the surrounding, from the people, and also the culture, target culture, and from themselves. He also can judge himself. Okay, so that's all from me. Thank you.
Assalamualaikum and good afternoon. So I will be the last presenter for this topic, and I will be presenting page 198 from the book. The topic is intercultural language learning. From the book, I have extract all the information and take all the main point and put in one slide. So in intercultural language learning, I have divided it into two categories. First, method and benefit. So in method, the first one is initiate social-cultural strategies. The definition of social-cultural strategies is using the culture of the language to make the second language learner to understand the culture first, so the language is more understandable. So under the initiate social culture strategies, first, initiate contact. So before we start learning, we have to initiate contact with the student or with the teacher who going to teach us. Then secondly, anticipating culture misunderstanding. So usually the language learner is from this different culture. For example, a Korean student wanted to learn English. So the teacher have to expect that the Korean student will misunderstood about the English culture. So the teacher have to prepare to explain to them about the culture and ready to prepare them to assimilate with the culture. And then use diplomacy. So in teaching intercultural language learning, you don't have to, for example, marah them, or in English I forgot, but let's continue. So in diplomacy, we use way that can befriend them and explain thoroughly about the culture that correlate with language. So activities that can be done in this method is reading, film, simulation games, and cultural assimilation. Reading, you can give them reading material. Oh, sorry, my slide just went down. So reading, we can give reading material that correlate with the culture itself about the language. Then film, we can show the film in, for example, English language. We can show all Hollywood film. And simulation game, they can play part in the history or role play of the language or the culture itself. And lastly, cultural assimilation, they can learn the ethics of English people, for example, eating manners or how do they speak with all the people or teacher. Then second part is benefit. What is the benefit of intercultural language learning? After you use all this method, the benefit is it can overcome language fatigue, overcome cultural fatigue. So when a new student from a different cultural background start learning new language, they will be confused without guidance and a correct method. So it can make them interested in learning. Then the second point, increase cultural and self-awareness. So when you use this method, it can make them more understand. Wrong grammar, but I just continue. So they will more deepen their understanding about this culture and self-awareness about, for example, English. They know the English culture, or for example, they move to America to learn English and have to learn English. The culture will more understandable for them, so they will not be confused and can can be easier to learn the language. So that's all for me, and I'm the last part. So bye bye.